Candlelight by Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Chapter 2. Chill blew the wind. Icicles formed and hardened on projecting stonework, a skirl of dust around the concrete pillars, and the wind moaned off along the covered ways, keening a dirge to the departed summer. In the waterway, named Bickersdyke, roaring icebreakers heaved and groaned as they charged into the thickening ice, charged and charged again, backing off cautiously along the just-cleared channel, stopping and rushing forward with great gouts of diesel fumes, spraying from exhausts until the reluctant ice gave, protesting with sighs and a long last crack, followed by the grumbling crumble of fractured edges. Shrouded figures bent listlessly over snow shovels, trying to spin out the time and still work hard enough to generate some heat. The wind freshened and wailed more sharply. One by one, the hooded men shouldered their shovels and shuffled off through the snow. A green shape momentarily hid the window and then blew away on the increasing gale. A garbage bag lifted bodily by the storm and strewn across the gardens. The gloom deepened. Snow swirled more thickly around the hard-seen skyscrapers, blotting out the lights and turning the vista into a mysterious scene of shifting shadows and vague, ill-defined pinpoints of flickering lights. Motor traffic skidded from side to side and finally ground to a complete halt as the visibility lowered and lowered. Snow fell and fell and fell. Throughout the night, the mindless flakes came teeming down, twisting and eddying as though imbued with a crazy half-life. By morning, when the first faint glimmers of light struggled feebly through the opacity, the world was at a standstill. Not a human, not a vehicle, not a bird broke the even shroud of freshly fallen snow. Crack! A sharp pistol shot of sound rang out. The old man in the bed jumped and painfully turned around. A great split was growing across the floor-to-ceiling window pane. Warm in the room and far, far colder than normal outside, and the glass had not been able to stand the temperature differential. Through the spreading crack, the freezing air spewed into the room. Colder and colder dropped the temperature. The crack spread and widened, and soon the room was unusable. The old man sat shivering in his wheelchair on the gallery outside his door. All over the building complex, windows were shattering in the record cold. The day seemed endless. The bitter cold seeped through the whole apartment. At the cracked window where the freezing air streamed in, mounds of frost formed and fell as a white dusting on the floor. The following day, after much persuasion, men came to replace the broken pane, the work of half a day, and the new glass was fitted. The men went to other apartments where the windows had cracked. Slowly, warmth returned to the rooms. Slowly, the cats emerged from piled blankets which had been warmed by hot water bottles. Lower and lower dipped the temperature during the night. Suddenly, in the very early hours of the morning, a loud report awoke the old man. Horrified, he watched. in the moon's pale glow as the crack again spread all the way across the 6-foot pane of glass. Again the cold with frost forming in the room. And later in the day, the workmen found that the window frame was distorted, so there was nothing for it but to move to another apartment. The days passed, and the weeks too, and at last the old man was again able to get on with his work, answering questions, and more questions. As one lady wrote, "It is so nice that I can write to you to get my questions answered. You charge nothing at all, but I don't ask Mr. XYZ anymore, as he charges $50 a question." Lucky Mr. XYZ, the old man thought. People don't even send me return postage. But if some questions are answered in this book, then people will not have to write me on the same things, right? So, here are the questions and the answers. Now, here's a question from a woman who writes, "What sort of adventure are you going to have when you've finished on this earth? Are you coming back to this world, or are you going to move to a different planet? I should be so interested to hear of your forthcoming adventures." Well, madam, my life is not an adventure. It's hard work. Hard work fighting against bias and prejudice and the hatred of people such as pressmen. You will find, if you study, that everyone, without exception, who has come to this earth to do something special has been persecuted unmercifully by those who have no understanding. It reminds me that dogs bark at the heels of anyone who is strange. It reminds me that fleas can bite anyone, irrespective of the status or stature of a person. I do not live adventure. I have been living, instead, in considerable hardship, trying to do a specific task, and encountering all manner of quite unnecessary hindrances. So please, do not write to me about adventures. None of these have been such to me. They have been unnecessary suffering, such as well-intentioned teacher might suffer at the hands of unheeding, demented children. When I leave this earth, I shall never at any time return to it, nor to this system. No doubt, when I have passed on, some stupid person will delude the credulous with advertisements in occult papers claiming, "In direct touch with Labsang Rampa, your questions answered from the heavenly fields." Well, don't believe a word of that. I shall not be in this zone at all, and I tell you quite definitely that people who advertise saying they get direct information and answers from those who have passed over are not really doing themselves or the deceased a service. People who have passed over have another life to live, another task to do. If you, for instance, emigrated to a far distant country where communications were poor with the area you had just left, could you stop doing your new work just because some stupid dope in the old country was saying, "Oh, you must help me. I have advertised saying I'm in direct touch with you. You must help me"? No, Of course you wouldn't. You have your own work to do, and you would not be interested in these advertisers who are just out to make money fast on the credulity of the average person. When I have gone from this earth, then I shall have gone to a completely different zone. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm going to do. So when I have gone, do not be deluded by stupid advertisements from stupid people in the press. Here's a question. You say that there cannot be a positive without a negative, a good without an evil. Does this assertion hold true in some or all dimensions for some or all of time? Will not God eventually illuminate the darkness everywhere by the sheer power of His love? Or will there always, somewhere on the outside, be an unending blackness or vacuum for God to light up and fill with His positive embrace? The Christian belief, as taught nowadays, is not at all as Christ Himself taught. Various priests throughout the ages have messed about with the teachings and the translations to get a bit more power for themselves. Of course, there cannot be a positive without a negative. It's absolutely clear. All life consists of impulses, vibrations, electric currents if you like, and you try to get your radio to work when you have only one wire connected to the plug. It cannot be done. Or, if you prefer a non-electrical system, you try to get a bath tap to run when there's nothing else coming into the system. You'll find that there's no water left. A positive and a negative are utterly essential. Otherwise there cannot be any flow, and it is so stupid to think that God is some old geezer who goes about with a flashlight in his hand, lighting up dark places. It isn't God who does it. It's the people who live in the places, light or dark. On Earth, for instance, the majority of people are busily engaged in cutting each other's throats behind their backs, or doing whatever harm they can. This is the age of pulling down. You get cheap morons pulling down people like Churchill and other great men because it makes the cheap punks feel great. It makes them think, oh, he's only human like us, and he can fall down too. Christians always imagine that there is no other form of religion except Christianity. They always imagine the Christian God goes about with a flashlight in each hand, and perhaps a few candles in his mouth, trying to illuminate the ways of the heathen who were managing quite well before Christianity started. And furthermore, Christianity is merely a hodgepodge of Hinduism, Buddhism, the Jewish faith, etc., all cooked up to suit a different time and age. So, please do not write such a lot of rot about God lighting up and embracing everyone everywhere. It just doesn't happen that way. The questioner goes on. As soon as Prince Satan is banished by the bright glare of his love, will he then just retreat, bringing his darkness with him into the unending space and time? Will he, at some time, find it to his advantage to unite with the Creator in perfect balance and harmony, or is he forever committed to defying the will of God? You must have a positive and a negative. You cannot have just one. And there is no possibility of Satan running hell for leather, or should it be leather for hell, to get out of the way of some imaginary God who's in hot pursuit. If such a thing could happen, there would be stasis, a state where everything was stationary, where nothing could move. I repeat again that you have to have a positive and a negative, and one is as important as the other. If you do not have a negative, then you can't have a positive, and that's all there is to it. This person says, there was a war in the heavens, thereby leaving open the possibility that there was once a complete unity of all, and everything with no conflict between positive and negative. If so, is this conflict now irrevocable? But my dear madam, it is not a conflict in the connotation of a good guy and a bad guy knocking lumps off each other. It's not like that at all. You take a battery and a bulb. You've got your battery, a flashlight if you will, and when you switch on, now read this carefully, you just complete the circuit so that positive and negative are connected to the bulb, and so you get a light. So if you go and bump off old Satan, or negative, whichever way you like to call it, then the light stops. Everything stops. And before too long, with nothing to do, the poor old battery decays and goes dead. Try it yourself and see. Go out to a store somewhere and buy a battery, perhaps a 4.5-volt battery. Buy 2 lumps of wire, perhaps 2 feet long, and then get a bulb. Connect up the battery and the bulb, and you'll have a light. Disconnect the negative, and you won't have any light. That's all there is to it. This never-ending struggle is the struggle of life itself. A baby struggles to get out of its mother. It struggles against illness. It struggles against the cramps of growing. It struggles when the teeth are coming through, and it makes a horrible noise in the process of struggling. All through the life there is struggle. Struggle to get a partner. Struggle to get divorced from the partner. Struggle to get a job, struggle to knock out the boss above so that promotion may be gained. Oh no, there must be struggle. It doesn't matter what you do. You still have to struggle. You even have to struggle out of bed in the mornings. When struggle ends, life ends. When life ends on this earth, then you go to another existence and you start struggling all over again. You might struggle in a more gentlemanly or ladylike manner on another world, but it is still struggle. Get that clear. Our inquirer goes on. Initially, I am distressed at the prospect of a never-ending struggle between an ecstatic happiness and an empty despair, with no anticipation of its resolve into a final happy ending, even though it be trillions of eons in the future. But as in the case of exploring into and analyzing other truths which at first alarmed me, I am of the firm conviction that the truth shall make one free in the final outcome, no matter what it is. Well, there it is. I am telling you the truth. I tell you the truth in all my books, so if you believe me, you would have known the truth before this. The truth is this: we are all struggling upwards to a final goal. That final goal is not sitting around like a crowd of hippies with some larger-than-life God decorated in gold and poster colors parading before one. God is quite a different thing from that. God is utterly different from the average Christian conception. As the Christians visualize God, it's just a parody of what the ancient heathens visualized as the gods on Olympus. They thought of Jupiter and a bunch of other gods and goddesses all making merry on the top of some mythical mountain. They must have been mighty cold up there, that's all I can say, because the imaginary pictures of them show them as being remarkably poorly dressed, and if they had ever cavorted on the top of a mountain in that lack of clothing, they would need to keep cavorting to keep warm. But anyway, this is the way it is. Let us rid ourselves of bias first, and let us look at the real problem. Let us look at communism. A certain little gang of people at the start thought, oh, why should this group of people have everything? We are the workers and we want everything too. And so they ganged up and they formulated some sort of a policy. The communists thought that all men and women should be equal and everyone should have the same amount of money, forgetting that if all the world had the same amount of money today, they would all have different amounts tomorrow. But the communists didn't like the way the capitalists were going on, so they formulated some kind of policy, if it can even be termed a policy, in which all the values of the capitalists were completely reversed. And then they went out to get converts, even if it made them out of work, even if they starved to death from hunger, and even if it brought misery to the world. In the early days of the Romans and the Greeks and a few other assorted people, there was a very good religion, a very good code of living, and people were happy, much more so than they are now. For example, there was much more freedom, cleaner freedom in sex. There was much greater companionship, comradeship between men and women. But then a little gang of people were jealous of the way the Greeks, the Romans, and the assorted other races were going on. They were too happy to be natural, they thought. So they took the teachings of a great man and altered them, bent them around, twisted them in a circle, and reversed everything that the Romans, the Greeks, etc., had been doing. Sex became something despicably filthy, and sex was awarded only to men as an inducement to do certain things which the priests wanted them to do. Women, instead of being the equal of men as they had been in the days of the Romans and the Greeks, women were now slaves, chattels, baggages for men to do with as they wished. But you often get situations like that when these little groups, possibly homosexuals at that, took a dislike to anyone. And so, throughout the years, Christians have worked hard to get converts, and they were going to make converts even if it killed the human concerned. If you think that's strange, then remember the Crusades. Armed bands of brigands invading other peoples who were peacefully inclined. If you want further food for thought, think about the Spanish Inquisition, where they tortured a man to save his soul. What a stupid lot of rot! If I see one side of a coin, that is what I see. But a person looking at the obverse of the coin would see a different picture altogether. It's the same coin, but we have different viewpoints. And all this talk about exploring other truths. The truth is that humans are upon this earth to grow, to develop into more spiritual creatures, and if they do not do it, they will be removed and other creatures will be put here. It is like plants in a garden. A gardener plants a whole bunch of plants and watches them carefully, and if they do not develop as they should, then they're pulled out and fresh plants of a different type are put in. That's all humans are. That's all horses are. Pigs are the same. Different plants, different growths, different things which are being observed upon this earth. Our querist goes on to ask, if such a thing as a perfect final peace were to come about in the worlds of rational beings, would the opposite worlds then be doomed to an opposite fate, to so-called hell forever, or would their outcome, more hopefully, be also one of a kind of peace that manifests itself somehow in an opposite manner, whatever that might be? Will not all gods, intelligent, rational beings, some day learn all their necessary lessons once and for all, and return to a complete awareness of and oneness with the Creator? Or would it always be in His scheme of infinite love to be continuously creating new beings who can choose to give themselves to Him after first undergoing great struggle between the positive, good, and negative, evil forces? Then, after they have passed all their tests and returned to God, will they be followed by other new created beings in a never-ending creation? If peace comes to this world, perfect peace that is, then it would mean that people here would not have to come back again. They would have learned a lesson, the lesson of keeping the peace, and then they would move on to some higher state of evolution where they could go to school again and learn something else. But all this about returning to God is nonsense. You don't return to God at the end of this life on earth, just as a small child returns to daddy or mummy. It's not like that at all. There are many, many things to be learned. There are billions, trillions of years to live in different states. And I must tell you, in this connection, that I had a most offensive letter from two people in Australia. A man and a woman claimed that they were in touch with the gardeners of the earth. And the gardeners of the earth were such wonderfully good people. And all that I write in The Hermit must obviously be imagination, because the gardeners of the earth would never do anything to harm a human. My goodness me, these people in Australia, they must have a hole in the head or something. Humanity is not the highest form of creation. It's just another specimen, the same as an ant is a specimen, the same as a tapeworm is a specimen. A tapeworm is learning one thing and a human is learning another, or rather, a correction. They should be learning which is a different matter altogether. But again, let me state definitely that we are here to learn certain things and to do certain things, and life goes on and on in cycles. I prefer to regard it as the swing of the pendulum. We have a pendulum swinging. Now it's at the top of its stroke, and we're at a golden age where everything is wonderful, everything is peaceful, but where nobody learns. Then the pendulum falls, and things become worse and worse, lower and lower. When we reach the lowest point of the pendulum swing, there are wars and rumors of wars and murders, everything, the whole crime calendar rolled into one. But after that, the heedless pendulum continues upwards, and so we get a golden age again, wherein no one learns, for it is a fact, a sad fact, but still a fact, that people only learn by hardship and by suffering. And when a person has all that he wants, he sits back and enjoys comfort and does not do anything to try to help others or even himself. Another person writes to ask, can we ever meet our individual opposites? By that, presumably, is meant the twin soul, and if that should be so, then the answer is no. You do not meet your twin soul on this world, because if you did, you would be complete and thus could not stay here. You only can stay here if you have an anchor which moors you here, some defect or some artificially induced fault which enables one to stay here. People who come from beyond the spheres are like divers. They have to wear the equivalent of a lead belt, lead boots, etc., in order to keep submerged in this dreary world. So, if a person met his or her twin soul, there would be the nearest approach there can be to perfection. And you cannot have perfection in a world such as this. So, you will have to wait for your twin soul until you leave this world. Now, another person says, you emphatically declare that each one of us finds God alone through individual effort, and that we should not depend upon others for assistance. Do you mean that the ultimate responsibility for use of one's free will in committing oneself to God rests squarely upon each individual's shoulders, no matter what kind or unkind things have been done to us by others? One consciously chooses the direction of his vision. Of course, truth and justice, or deceit and justice, can affect the course of our lives either way, towards or away from the light, but isn't the application of the golden rule vitally important for each of us to practice, thereby helping others? I say quite definitely that every person must stand alone. It is silly to join cults and gangs and associations, institutes, etc., etc., and to expect salvation thereby, because you won't find salvation in these money-making cults, which are merely out to get your money. Look at it like this. A person dies. He leaves this earth for the astral realms, and that person is going to go to the Hall of Memories and answer to himself or herself for things which have been done or have not been done. There's no one else there except the newly arrived soul or entity or whatever you like to call it, and the connection with the Overself. Now, I tell you quite definitely, quite definitely, you answer alone. You won't get the secretary or chief tutor of the hot dog society or whatever you like to call all these cult things to come and answer for you. You won't find the president of the Red Nose Association coming and saying, "Oh, yes, Overself, you don't know anything. I told this person to do such and such a thing because the rules of our association say that that is so, so he should take your place." No, you have to stand alone, then, naked and probably ashamed with it. And if you toss out all thoughts of these associations and cults on this earth, then you will be in training to answer alone when you reach the other side. Of course, if you are going to answer to your Overself, then you need to have some good answers. And the best way is to obey the golden rule, which is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This person who writes this question seems to be wriggling and writhing and doing anything to evade the simple truth. The truth which is, you have to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, no matter whether they are flat or not. You have to stand on them. You have to be responsible for yourself. And if you help others by adherence to and obedience of the golden rule, then you will have much good in your astral bank account. Let me again state that God is not standing there with a whacking great cane, and the devil is not standing there with branding irons either. God is a positive force. The devil is a negative force. They are not people who praise or torture. While down here on this earth, you cannot understand things which happen in many more dimensions. In the same way, a sea slug sitting on a bit of slime in the bottom of the ocean could not possibly understand what people on the moon are experiencing. It could not even understand what people in high-rise buildings are thinking or doing, nor could it understand the commotion which is caused when people turn their television sets full on. All that would be completely beyond the comprehension of people here in the 3rd dimension to try to understand what people in the 9th, the 10th, 11th, or 20th dimension are doing. So, everything is relative. We might understand more or less what other people on earth are doing. We might have a greater feeling that they are doing right or they are doing wrong, but how could we possibly attempt to understand what 20th dimension people are doing? You cannot comprehend the concepts of another dimension unless you've had some experiences of that dimension. Actually, you can get an idea, a rough idea, from thinking that everything is vibration. One end we call feel. A bit further we say sound. Higher up still, it is sight. Everything is vibration on any planet or any system or any universe. So that gives us some faint illustration of other dimensions. It's rare indeed for a person to feel a sound or see a sound, yet they're all vibrations, all part of the same scale. There are entities who can see sound. There are animals who can hear different sounds, those which are beyond human range. Dogs, for instance, will respond to a whistle which is completely silent to humans. Cats see colors on a different spectrum. Cats, for example, see red as silver. But to give another slight illustration which might help, try to work out this for yourself. We have a person who was born blind. Now, you have the task of explaining to that person who was born blind the difference between red and pink, or between yellow and orange. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, you can't. There is no way in which you can explain to a blind person the difference between yellow and orange or amber and brown. You could possibly explain the difference between red and green if the person was extremely sensitive and could feel the difference. But you work that out. You want to know what other dimensions are like, so cut off a dimension that you know. Cut off sight. Then, how are you going to explain to a person who has never known sight the difference between pink and red? Supposing you have a person who's completely deaf. How are you going to get that person to appreciate the difference between two fairly similar musical notes? It's not so easy, eh? So unless you can give me answers to my questions, I cannot tell you of the experiences of the ninth dimension. Here's a question which will make your hair stand on end. So ladies, put on your bath hats. And gentlemen, if you are bald, your hair will be standing up on your bald skulls. Here's a question. According to the Zen philosophers, there really is no right or wrong, thereby eliminating the need for judgment. Can you answer that? Well, I see the point behind it, and the answer is this. On the greater scale of things, right and wrong are completely different from what they are on earth. Here there are certain rules or laws which have to be obeyed for what is commonly thought of as the common good. For example, it is not right to steal, so a man, in theory at least, should starve to death rather than steal money to buy food. If a man is smoking and for some reason he puts his still lit pipe in his trousers pocket and sets his trousers on fire, then, in theory, he shouldn't pull them off, because then he'd be naked and he would offend public decency. He could, in fact, be charged with indecent exposure, so according to law, a man should be definitely hotted up in all the best places rather than expose himself to the lewd gaze when his trousers were on fire. Well, which do you consider right? While on the subject of indecencies, in some places the lady must keep her face covered from the gaze of all mankind. She can leave the lower part of her body quite uncovered and still be decent. Yet in other parts of the world she can have her face bare, but the lower part of her body must be covered, otherwise she's very much in disgrace. So, what is right in one part of the world is wrong in another. Right and wrong are man-made precepts, and these have no basis of stability beyond the earth. At the same time, If one is judging oneself in the Hall of Memories, one has had to go according to the rules in force during one's lifetime. It would not matter in the least if you had transgressed against the purely artificial laws. For instance, if you had removed your clothes in public, that would not be an offense in the greater reality of the astral world. Anyway, Christians believe that man is made in the image of God, and yet they make an awful hullabaloo if a person appears naked. But why? Are they saying that God is indecent? But anyway, that's just a personal thought of mine. What does matter in one's judgment is that you have to answer. Have you harmed another person? Have you helped another person? As examples of this, a person had a job which you coveted. You very much wanted that job. You could see yourself exactly fitting into that position, and so you made a little plot against the incumbent of that position, so that he was discharged from his employment, and you took it in his place. Now, that, of course, is a sin, because that is going against a law of the universe which says, do no harm unto others. But if you told a little white lie in order to help a person get a job which he really could do, then that lie would not be an offense, it would be good. Far away, above all the trumpery laws and regulations of mankind, there are basic truths, basic rules which we transgress only at our peril. The laws of man on earth are not made for the individual, but for the majority, so that the best interests of a majority can be served. Often a law will appear to inflict hardship upon an individual. Never mind, that is one of the things we have to put up with if we are crazy enough to live in communities, because liberty is a relative term. If we were free to do anything at all, then we could go into anyone's house, take anything we wanted, do anything we wanted, and then we would be entirely free. Actually, that would not be to the benefit of the community as a whole, and so there are laws to protect the majority against the minority, and we break those laws at our peril. Peril on earth, that is. Most of them don't matter the slightest beyond this earth. What does it matter, for instance, if a person buys a package of cigarettes in England after 8 o'clock in the evening? What does it matter if in Canada a person buys a newspaper on a Sunday? All these are childish, stupid things, but somebody had an idea somewhere, even if nobody knows what the sense of the said law now is. Here's another question. I understand that entities of the fourth and other dimensions are all very busily occupied in helping souls in this, the third dimension, and they stay exclusively helping us upon this world. What do they get out of it? No, of course this is not true. Let us consider life, all life, as a school. Of course somebody will write me to say, "Oh, you're repeating yourself. You've told us all this before." But obviously I couldn't have told it very clearly, or people wouldn't still be asking me about it. So, you people who want to write and complain, just be quiet for a bit, will you? All life is a school, then. Different classes, different grades. We on this earth happen to be in grade 3, the third dimension. People in the fourth dimension are in grade 4. People in the fifth dimension are in grade 5. Now, tell me seriously, thinking back to your own school days, can you truthfully say that the students in grade 5 at your school were very interested in staying on and helping the students in grade 3? More likely, the grade 5 students thought the grade 3 students were crummy little punks who were beneath even a contemptuous notice. That is so, isn't it? So let me tell you this. There are certain people who are teachers who are unfortunate enough to be persuaded to volunteer to come to grade 3 to teach the crummy little punks in this class. And when they get down to grade 3, they find that the students are not at all anxious to learn. Were you anxious to learn when you were at school? So the teacher gets all sorts of nasty things said about him, and eventually he really gets fed up with the whole procedure, and he says to the headmaster, "Well, boss, I can't stick it with all these punks. I've got to go to a different class or I'll go even crazier. Where can you move me?" So take it from me, the teachers on the earth, teachers from other dimensions, are trying hard to do something to help the people in grade 3, help the people in the third dimension. And if the people in the third dimension would be a bit more appreciative, they would get on much faster, because there comes a time when even the best of teachers get sick and tired of continual persecution, and they want to move on. Now, I have been taken to task, not for the first time and not for the last, but I have had a comment. "Oh, but you can't leave it like that. People will not at all understand what you mean by God. In some places you say that God is a concept, and in other places you say that God is a person. Now, how are you going to account for that?" Oh dear, oh dear. Troubles never come simply, do they? Well, there are gods and gods. The average person prays to his or her God. Actually, the prayers are going on the first class route to the Overself. But if you want to get a bit higher up, then you can pray to the Manu of the planet. Or if you have connections up there, you can pray to the Manu of this whole universe. As I have tried to make clear in my books, but apparently without any success, the God system is very much like a multiple store or a chain of stores where you have each branch manager as God to his cohorts or hirelings. But all the department managers or branch managers look upon the president or chairman of the company as God. So, let's try to get this clear. One can pray to a person whom one regards as God. He may be the Overself, he may be a Manu, or he may be a chief Manu, or he may even be the God of the universe, but he is not the top God by any means. The top God is something completely different, something which one can only regard as a concept at the present time, because, as I have already been telling you, You cannot discuss 9 or 10 or 20-dimensional things in 3-dimensional concepts. So, go on regarding your God as a person or entity, but keeping clear in your mind that there is something very, very much higher than all of this. End of chapter 2.